Jack, welcome to the show, man. Could you start by telling us a little bit about your journey as an athlete? And then, in addition, I'm also curious what pitchers do for sports once their pitching career is over. I think you mentioned something about tennis, so I'm curious. I'm curious of that trajectory as well. But yeah, your sport background, and then what you're up to now.
Well, you popped open the can of worms early on this one. So yeah, I'm a former college baseball player. Played at Division III Salisbury University, go Gulls. And growing up was not like the greatest athlete per se, kind of like a chubby kid. Both of my siblings were endurance sport athletes. So like one was a distance swimmer, the other one did soccer and lacrosse. And so I've alluded to this a couple of times with some other people, but like our meals were pretty carb and calorie centric. And for a third baseman, corner infielder on a baseball field, that wasn't super conducive to having like an elite physique. And so had to kind of adjust some habits there as I got older, but that helped me kind of dive into training and sports performance, which is obviously why we're here, and really enjoyed that and applied it to my own career. And so used that and through college, just continued to pick up on bits and pieces. Tommy Labriola is a good friend of mine. He's a former strength coach for the Blue Jays, and he was my strength coach in college. Also got the opportunity to play with him for my first 2 years and just saw what he did and saw how much passion he applied to the weight room, but then also the field side of things. And that really gave me some tools and some insight on maybe this is something that I want to do one day if the broadcasting thing doesn't work out, which it didn't. That was kind of my own doing just because I had more of a fire under my rear end to do something like this and stay involved with athletics and performance and fitness and health and all that good stuff. And so that kind of brought me into doing this now in the online space. And as far as what pitchers really do when they're done playing, I always loved training and I always loved fitness and I always loved just competing and being on a team. And so when I lost the team aspect, that allowed for me to try and pursue some new competitive outlets. And so I tried the jiu-jitsu thing. I have long levers. And so basically like all I had was a ground game and triangle chokes, but that's like a pretty limited offensive repertoire there as it relates to grappling sports. I still golf here and there, but 5 hours out of your day is a big chunk of time.
Yeah, it is.
So I was like, all right, so where can I get a good like cardiovascular stimulus, sweat, and compete and have just like something that's going to really give me that competitive aspect of my life that I lost when I stopped playing. And so I just gave tennis a try. I'm kind of pseudo anti pickleball. I don't really know. Like I don't know. I'm more of a traditionalist, I guess. You know, I wear all the cotton apparel. I'm not into like the Gymshark stuff. So yeah, you saw the blue light blockers. I'm an optimizer to a certain degree, but really do enjoy tennis. So watching the US Open, watching Wimbledon, watching Carlos Alcaraz just get to every single ball on the court, like that kind of stuff. It started with a toe, just kind of dipped in, and then I just dove head first. And that's kind of where we're at now. That's part of the training journey, still lifting a lot of weight and still doing mobility stuff and doing some distance running as well. I found out I have a pretty good VO2 max for my age, apparently. And so, and again, like long levers, long arms.
Yeah.
I can do some work on a track, apparently. So that's kind of where we're at with everything.
Yeah. I think in the midst of athletic performance, a very explosive orientation. But for those of us who have a distance swimmer or runner somewhere in the family tree, there's a superpower of work capacity in there somewhere. I think that's just important to mention. I know for myself, like I have a good general work capacity, not necessarily just distance running, but just doing a lot of work, like in a dense period of time. I was like a good hustler on the basketball court and stuff. And so I realized I need to feed that engine, and that is enjoyable. But finding diverse ways of doing it is the trick. I don't enjoy, if I was just to go run 3 or 4 miles on the road, that would not necessarily be my favorite thing. But yeah, feeding that animal, I think, or finding a way to do that, I think is really important.
For sure. And it's something that I wish I would have discovered sooner, because maybe I could have like gotten some scholarship money to like go and I'm not saying that like cross country would have been that competitive outlet for me, but I was never the type of guy that could just like pick up a ball and flick mid 90s
Mm-hmm.
off the rip. And I know people that can do that, or, you know, just jump 35 plus after not jumping for a while. I was definitely more type 2 oriented, I guess. And so like that's where I probably could have leaned into the cardiovascular side or found like more of that work capacity based action earlier that might have been more conducive to just my genetic predisposition. But you don't want to look back, learn from the experience, and maximize what I probably could have from just like a pure power and strength side. But then the gains became so negligible, I was like, I need a new outlet. And that's where I'm getting some of these newbie gains now. And that's where it's really fun. So hopefully I can maintain that level of enthusiasm throughout the next 6, 12, 18 months, however long this really goes.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned, Jack, like family tree, a distance swimmer. And I've worked with distance swimmers, a fair number of them. And if you want to have this spectrum of like, on one end, super explosive team sport athlete, I would say almost all the way on the other is distance swimmer. Not in every case, but in quite a few cases. So I think that there's also something to, those of us who had to overcome some of those genetic limitations, like if you were a more slow twitch athlete, and it's a thing where you almost don't want to read it if you have a gene report that said you are slow twitch, like you wouldn't want to read that. But it definitely, the problem to solve to become more explosive is it's not as direct as, like you said, those people who can just pick the ball up and just rip 95 and they have all those things just sitting there more readily than those of us who have to climb more rungs on the ladder to get there.
Yeah, like for me, when I was going through like I don't know if you've had Jake on the podcast, but like when I was doing the vertical jump protocol, or when I was doing sprint training, the curvature within like the developmental line for me was definitely a lot more gradual.
Mm-hmm.
To whereas when I started distance running, it took me a month to be able to knock my 1,000 time down to like a sub 2, or like my, I could sit in the high 5s, low 6s as far as mile pace for like more than 2 miles.
Yeah.
And so like I ran, I think it was 9 miles the other day at like a sub 9 pace, and woke up the next day and felt like I could do it again. And so maybe that's just the fact that I'm all limb, and like the relationship between my rib cage and my pelvis is so short that I literally just have like, it's probably not conducive for me to try and chase output in the weight room. And I told my training partner that I'm working with now, it's like, I'm probably not going to be a bodybuilder. I'm probably not going to be the strongest guy in the gym, but darn it if I'm not going to have one of the highest VO2 maxes and work capacity and be able to cook you on the track, after a month of training and actually being able to like kind of periodize what I'm doing. Because before it was just like, I wanted to build this work output, preparing for this elk hunt that I'm doing in Colorado soon. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to start with like a 20-minute run. And I'm just going to add a minute per week. And that's what I did until I met my training partner. He's like, no, you got to do a speed session. If you want to get faster, you have to do a distance session or like a volume session. You have to do your slower paces, your faster paces. Like you literally approach this just like any other training modality. It's just that it's all one action and you're just doing it at different intensity. And so if your only goal is to increase your volume or what you're able to withstand on the lower half, like, yeah, adding a minute to your runs per week is probably making sense. But if you do want to get faster, if you do want to be able to run further for longer at faster paces, you need to kind of like split up the focuses of each one of those training sessions and supplement them in throughout the week. And that's something that it's not that I didn't realize it. I think that you can apply that simplicity of progressive overload to pretty much any training modality, but just being a newbie and not having the knowledge of working with runners or even being one myself, until you hear from somebody else, you're not going to actually apply it to the training side.
Yeah. It makes me think about pitching in the sense of any aerobic contribution as well. Like with tennis, like tennis is essentially launching a projectile, although you have a tool with a repeat component. Like there's an aerobic system involved. And it makes me think of a sport I've never played, team handball, where running and throwing repeatedly, like when you add an aerobic piece to something. I know I benefited tremendously by playing basketball for my track and field career. And it wasn't only just the intentional little cuts and jumps and sprints and blocking shots and getting rebounds. I think that I also played in a manner that probably reflected my strengths, which was really just a lot of volume, just a lot of medium to high intensity sprints. Like I needed that volume. And it makes me think too about like, yeah, tennis and if someone's a little bit more slow twitch like you and you just get the reps in, get the reps in, that's probably pretty helpful. I wonder, maybe, tennis in the off season would have been your jam back in the day too. Like for those people who do need more stimulation, a little slower twitch on the end. There needs to be a new term for that too, by the way. I feel like if we want to make everything binary or slow twitch or fast twitch, maybe we can call it something else. You're more work capacity positive. I don't know. Something.
Yeah.
Call it something else, because you can still deliver good outputs. It's just the route there is just a little bit different than the person, like you said, who can pick up the ball and just whip 95 and needs more explosive, just pure explosive pieces.
Yeah, I think you can manipulate like the slider to a certain degree to where like you are going to bias towards one side or the other. And that's not to say that like through your training, you can shift it one way or the other as well. But you're probably always going to have just like the ability to pick up where you left off as it relates to one of those sides, due to genetics or due to just whatever the case may be. We did do some tennis we had a gorgeous indoor tennis center at my school. And so in the winter semester, when we would be there for class or just training and like preparing for the springtime, we would be looking for like cross training outlets. And basketball at that point just seemed a little bit more like risk averse for us. You turn an ankle or like a knee or something like that through jumping, like right before the season, probably not the best idea. Tennis being a little bit less contact. We also would do like racquetball, squash, things like that.
Oh yeah.
So like racket sports with throwers, especially, lot of crossover there. But as far as like the work capacity point, definitely a lot easier to sort of program in or give to guys to when you give them like a competitive outlet. And I made the comment to one of my coaches the other day. It's that like conditioning for court sports is miserable. And when you compare it to like distance running outside or like a cardio stimulus, it's like, yeah, we don't have any problem running 4 miles in the park and the scenery changes and the weather's nice. But if you put us indoors and you just give us lines that we have to go back and forth on for 200 times or whatever for an hour straight, like that's the physical sport representation of the loony bin, essentially,
It is. I couldn't imagine. Yeah. Could you imagine? And yeah, that environmental piece changes everything. Even just track background, running 8 200s is kind of a standard a little bit longer tempo sprint workout for a lot of athletes, really. There's a range that could work for. And when I would do that kind of workout with teammates, it is totally different than doing that myself. It is a completely different workout. And I think there's definitely a lot to that. What you were saying, Jack, about like racquetball, that really got some gears going, because I think that just like basketball is kind of like a feeder for, I think, the track and field jumps. Well, what's the feeder for a more singular, like baseball? It's just you stand there and you swing. And of course, you have a variety of ways you can swing, but you're not really moving. It's not like you're running and swinging. I guess you could say lacrosse, right? Like maybe that would be the feeder, because I just think about what puts you in multiple positions. But you mentioned racquetball, and I think, oh yeah, like you would end up in a lunge and do a swing type position, or a reverse lunge, or lunging to the clockwise if your right foot's forward side of your body and doing a reverse hit of the ball. And there's more lower body options that could fit with that. And you have a little subtle aerobic piece in the background, which I also think the aerobic piece, like not crazy, but enough to kind of get you out of your head a little bit too. Like I think more authentic movement can get unlocked a lot of times when you have a little bit of heart rate, just enough to kind of, there's more flow, like blood flow, general, that kind of general thing. And I was even thinking about it's like Danny ball or Hoover ball, like 2-on-2 or 3-on-3 medicine ball volleyball, basically, where it's at least there's not so many players that the ball probably isn't going to come to you, but like you're getting involved every play. There's something it's just a little bit faster rendition of what you do. And yeah, I think you got my mind turning on all the different ways that are like feeder for even something that's more singular and serial in nature.
Well, the reactive component too. Pitching is completely unreactive in the sense that you start every play.
Yeah.
Where with a quarterback, they're not going to struggle with command or like the yips per se. And I'm going to use the Y word. I don't care if people are scared of that word. Like you need to verbalize it in order to, give it less of an importance or a significance. It's because they have the defenders moving around them. The line changes, the routes change, the time on the clock changes, your arm slot's going to change to a certain degree. And so like they're going to have better command. To whereas with pitching, you have 20 seconds in between throws and you're throwing to a stagnant target. It's the same reason that somebody can stand over a golf ball on a golf tee and start thinking about a million things. It's because like you have to actually like hit the ball off the tee in order for it to do anything, in order for like the play to start. And so I think there's definitely a component to that. And with the racket sports, especially, like you have the reactive component, like before you serve, and that's where a lot of people get messed up because again, that starts the play.
Yep.
And so like you take away that reactive component to where you just have to like dive, stand up, make a throw to a base, or you just have to like beat the guy running to the base with a throw. You can dot a bull's behind doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You put that same guy on the mound, he has no clue where the ball is going. Same thing with a tennis player. They might scorch 5 serves into the net or have no clue what they're doing when they toss the ball up and they have to hit it, but they can scorch a backhand down the line, or they can, hit a 100 mile an hour forehand winner with no problem, or come up to the net, volley, all those types of things. So I think that's a big piece of it as well.
Athletic performance is built on a spectrum of training methods, from high velocity skills to power training to strength work. And on one end of that spectrum, on that strength end, you have the most targeted work in the form of machines. And this is part of the reason that so many top speed and strength coaches have their favorite machines to deliver that targeted stimulus. For decades, Hammer Strength has been a top provider of reliable, effective machines that are trusted by coaches and athletes worldwide. They fit seamlessly into that total performance program, delivering that targeted strength stimulus. When it comes to your machine-based strength training needs, think Hammer Strength. Weighted vests have been a staple in athletic performance for decades, but the next generation in wearable resistance is found in light micro-loads placed on the limbs of the body. The leader in micro-loading and wearable resistance is Exogen gear by Lila. Exogen is used by the top track and field and sports performance coaches in the world, and it provides a level of angular velocity training and potentiation that is second to none. If you want 20% off of Exogen gear by Lila, then head to lilateam.com, that's lilateam.com, and use the code JustFly20. That's JustFly20 for 20% off your order. Grab your Exogen gear today and see the difference in your training. Yeah, I think that's a really underrated element. As one of the areas of study that I've been really interested in maybe the last probably 3 years, and it was something in Nick Winkelman's book, The Language of Coaching. I feel like I'm saying that wrong. If it's such a ubiquitous book, I'm sorry, Nick. If I think it's The Language of Coaching. But anyways, it talks about the different brain networks. And one of the main ones is the default mode network, which is kind of you're just daydreaming, ruminating. Like it would be very active if you're like doing a set of squats and you just sit there before the smartphone era and people just sit on the bench. So you do a set of squats, you're just sitting there, you're just kind of ruminating, daydreaming. You're not like necessarily, you're not flowing like you would be like the ball's going back and forth in tennis or something like that. But as soon as there's things flying at you, there's less room for the rumination. There's less room for that default mode network to mess you up, essentially. And what's interesting too is I believe like our sense of self, the ego is very active in that default mode network. So that person waiting to pitch, that egocentric default mode, okay, I'm going to do this, or waiting to serve, like you said, that's very active. But then the ball's in play and all of a sudden that can change. But it's that's been one of my biggest pieces in studying and both sport and even just the way we train basic athletic abilities, because I don't think we give it its due credit. Because like you said, it can definitely, especially people who are overthinkers and their ego is really tied up in their performance or any combination of those things. And it's really interesting what you mentioned with the yips too. I don't come from a baseball background, but when you give that analogy between a pitcher and a quarterback, I was thinking, oh, that makes perfect sense, because I've never heard of a quarterback getting the yips. I mean, my father-in-law is a Browns fan, and living through the Deshaun debacle, maybe there's a lot of that. I don't know, but yeah, that's such an interesting. This is such an interesting comparison you had there.
Well, I grew up playing quarterback too, and we didn't throw the ball a ton. Like we ran the triple read option, or not the triple read option, but we ran a read option based offense, and so like we were lucky to throw the ball more than 10 times a game. Mm-hmm. And those times that we did, it would be no issue for me to hit, a crossing route or like a harder route to throw like into the defense, because I usually had to run for my life because I outweighed 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen. And that was just kind of the reality of our team. Like they, credit to the guys that were in front of me. They did a great job. They did the best they could. But when I'm 180 pounds as a high school quarterback and the rest of my linemen are like 165, 170, 172, 175, whatever. And then we had like 280 pound behemoth. You have to be very, very reactive to what's going on around you. And so I'm not thinking about like how the ball is coming out of my hand, how I'm gripping it, obviously with pitching, you have different pitches that you need to throw and counts, and the hitter's going to be reactive to that as well. So that's a secondary element to that. But I think that the simplification aspect as it relates to coaching, where we see a Luke Weaver type eliminate the leg lift and he has a lot of success. Guys kind of like quick pitching and that being some of their best ways that they can get guys out, or like messing with timing or even visual focal points to where guys won't even pick up the target until right before they release the ball and their command goes up. So there's a lot of different like brain and body sort of connections and manipulations that you can make as far as timing and visual cues and all those sorts of things that can help give guys solutions if they are dealing with the yips or that type of issue,
Yeah. Yeah. So how many times are you allowed to say the word if it is a big deal? I'm again, not the baseball world, but
start the count.
Yeah. It makes me think about, I've probably mentioned this somewhat recently in this series as a Darian Barr talking about the stumble. Like Darian Barr, one practice, he's mentored me in biomechanics and been on this podcast a lot of times, but there was a practice where he would like intentionally tell us to intentionally stumble in an acceleration. And I would say there's probably a lot of similarities, like that pitcher who's not looking till the last second. What it does, it just makes you more reactive. As soon as you have to react, your deep innate systems have to react to something, and you're basically not allowing your forebrain or the default mode network to get overly active. It's like, how can I constantly trick the system to allow the parts of my human machinery to do the innate job it's supposed to? I just sent this out. I was digging through, I send out a weekly email, and the last email, a lot of the focus was on like our innate power outputs. And I think there's a lot to be drawn from the animal kingdom. And so I like watching like bears fighting is really interesting. Like they're just kind of like going around each other like, and then all of a sudden one just explodes. And it's so visceral if you watch it. I'm like, this is insane. Like there's total disinhibition. You would call it just pure power of nature. But that power lies inside of us on a, not like a bear like strength level, but that basic ability. It's just we have to shut off all the things that are inhibiting that away to allow it to move forward. So I like the one you said about the not looking till the last second. I feel it hit close to me because I was thinking, oh, I would do that. I would that's a trick I would do. And I think for people listening, just for the sake of speed and power, I know it myself too. If I do a sprint from a 2-point start, 3-point start, I'm thinking about, okay, got my knees here, my shin angles here, versus just start on your belly, get up and race somebody, and everyone starts on your belly. The coach says go, and you all race. I was always way better at that, and honestly, I think I was faster and moved a lot better if it was that type of situation, or like a stumble. So I think that this type of principle is universal, whether you're training something that's more linear speed or more complex. I suppose the place you probably wouldn't want to do it necessarily is squatting 500 pounds. Hey, drop it. I'm going to push the weight right away. Go save yourself.
Yeah.
Go do that. The innate athletic piece, I just think there's so much there that people don't talk about so often.
Or like how many college track coaches could recruit, athletes based on them participating in some type of debauchery and hearing police sirens go off, and then how quickly they have to get away from whatever they're doing, a reactive piece. And it's just something where you're not thinking about anything besides getting out, like get out as fast as you possibly can, and that being the only sole focus.
Yeah, I love even just having, speaking of distance swimmers, there was in the off season back training swimmers at Cal, you mentioned basketball and risk. And so there was a certain amount of risk I would tolerate once the season got around. But in the way off season, we would have them do a fair amount of even chasing drills, like where one guy's lying on their stomach, the other person's standing a few feet behind him. And as soon as the person gets up, then that's the trigger and you sprint away and go. And it's fun watching athletes, especially the ones who are running away. You're spinning your wheels and all that type of thing, just that reactive ability. As it pertains to throwing, I heard Dan John once talk about discus and a machine gun drill where I don't know how many discus you have, disci, what's the plural of discus? How many disci you have to have sitting there to pull up this drill? But it's basically like throw the disc, hand him another one, or her, throw the disc, hand another one, throw the disc, hand another one. And I would imagine that would stimulate probably a pretty similar, you're not getting overly hung up on okay, I should have my arm here. It's more like you have to start tying into feeling. I was going to ask you, Jack, if you do any, or thoughts on any density, like you said 20 seconds between a pitch, but is there any manipulations of density that is anything that people do in training pitching?
Yeah. Not to pull out too many dad jokes, but this guy sounds smart. But one of the drills I posted a while back, and I actually saw Devin Hayes do it for the first time with an athlete. He was on the mound, and basically they would make a throw. As soon as that throw was completed, they would turn around and he would toss them a ball, and they had to do sort of that reactive catch to where it's somebody tosses you something, you do the little stumble, two-hand kind of into your stomach type catch, and then he would have to throw it again, just get rid of the ball as quickly as possible. And so I've seen Brooks Hall do this as well, and a number of other people, just to clean up arm actions, to get you out of the conscious brain as it relates to just a specific piece of the skill, to where you would have a guy standing either behind you or to the side, and you can manipulate the positioning. You do even probably have a guy from the front if you wanted to include more of a deeper arm swing from the hand starting out in front and then pulling your way back all the way up into flip up. But the whole goal is to catch the ball with your throwing hand and then get it out of your throwing hand as quickly as possible. So no glove tap, no leg lift, no lower body movement, upper body movement. It's simply something that's a time constraint for the arm itself. And I've seen a lot of success with it on numerous occasions. Now, where I think you aren't always able to mesh that into the actual skill of pitching as it relates to the entire action of the leg lift and throwing different pitches and the time constraint of the pitch clock and just the gamesmanship itself, is going from that into, okay, you can't do that in game. You can't have the third baseman toss you the ball or the shortstop toss you the ball and then you just make a reactive throw. Would that be great? Absolutely, because I've dealt with the stabby arm action and it's not fun. But At the same time, I think that there are ways that you can manipulate like the time constraint of just like first move. And so it's like something with your foot or something with your knee or something with like your front shoulder or something with the glove side, to where it's like you're giving yourself that first move that isn't coming from the arm directly, and something that creates that reaction that then allows for you to just like not have to think about anything other than like get the ball out of your hand, and that being the only focus.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had similar thoughts in the sense of, like I mentioned you with like the get up start. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
like or a stumble start. Yeah, obviously if I'm on the starting blocks in my meet, I mean I could stumble just for fun in the first meet or something, but yeah, what do you do to distract your brain to allow a quickness? And yeah, what's even coming to mind is things I know Darian Barr had mentioned. He was talking about like Ben Johnson's start, who Ben Johnson, one of the most like almost like an alien. There's one start he's doing, a sprinter in the 80s, for people who don't know, steroids, but lots of guys were on steroids at that point.
Yeah.
And yeah, he just there's one that looks like you wound up a spring and he just shoots out the starting blocks. And Darian had said something about looking at even like the tension. It's almost like they're flexing their arms real quick or something, their triceps, like, and he had us doing that, like kind of creating tension in the hands. But even just doing that distracts you in a little bit from whatever else is going on. I know, yeah, relax waiting for the gun. I do get that. There's that. And ultimately, it's probably the best practice. But I like thinking of, well, what are the little subtle steps that you would take to get from that reactive, oh, I felt that thing when it was reacting externally. Now, how do I make that world internal? How do I do that same thing when it's just me and there's nothing else, or, those like little tricks to do it. And I think that's that approach to mastery. And same thing with the climbing the ladders, like that guy at the top, maybe even outside of fast twitch, maybe just being a good athlete, that person at the top, the guy or the girl, they could just turn it on. And that's, I think, where they say too, like a lot of the best movers, I've heard this in parkour, are not intellectual giants. They're the
Yeah.
people who have the least of those typical tripwires of the, forebrain default mode network. Maybe that part of their brain is just not going. But I think for the rest of us, especially those of us who really take to that intellectual side, it's a big deal. And I was going to ask with baseball, I want to keep a lot of this very, general, applicable to whatever your sport is, whatever your training practice. But it strikes me that, and maybe that's because there's a lot of pauses in baseball. It seems like baseball and Moneyball, right? Like baseball is very data centric. It can be hyper cerebral. And I've heard you talk about a lot of things, basically to not make it hyper cerebral. Something that you mentioned on your, might have been Instagram or social media, Twitter, was like just like being sexy, essentially. Like that's the opposite of overthinking in so many ways. I'd be curious for you to explain that one as well.
Yeah, and I think for me to go into like a deep tirade on this would be really counterintuitive to the entire idea behind it. Because it really is that simple, to where it's just like, if that's your only cue that you can give yourself, I think it's a pretty darn good one, because it just allows for you to get back to whatever is your unique skill set that allows for you to perform at the highest level. And so if that means that like your version of being sexy is just flipping over like 72-mile-an-hour sliders from a low slot, like, is that, from the public perspective, not as sexy as throwing like 100 miles an hour at the top of the zone and blowing a guy's doors off? Maybe not. But the fact of the matter is that you can get a lot of guys out. And it's also the difference between like, them awarding sexiest man alive to some, big fat funny guy versus like the guy with the 8-pack, like they're both sexy in their own unique ways. And they can accomplish the same type of deal, whether it's appeal or whether it is performance, based on their own unique skill sets. And so that's really what it came down to. And I got it from Bryce Harper. He did an interview in one of his earlier years, Nationals, talking about how he had a hitting coach who he was going through this period of cerebral practice and just really kind of struggling. I don't even know if like you can call it the hitting yips or whatever you want to call it, but just like was struggling at the plate. And he was just like, go out there and be sexy, man. And he went out and he was able to kind of break the rut and break the pattern as a result of that. And it also made me think back to my own career, to where I was like, the times that I was able to break out of a rut or a slump, it was the most mundane, like non-related to the actual physical action things that allowed for me to really get out of that or find my way back towards the path of elite performance that I wanted to be on. So it was like something as simple as my mom like taking me to the driving range and being like, oh, try and hit this target with your 7-iron, try and hit that target with your pitching wedge, or going out and playing a game of pickup basketball, or just doing something completely unrelated, like eating a different meal, like those different pattern breaks. And then from that point, you can just go back into the game and just be like, go out there and have fun. I had a college teammate, and this is kind of like where I'll wrap up this point, I guess, but like he noticed that like I was super distracted, like super overstimulated during like a pretty important series that we had. And he's like, you need to lock in. Come here. And so he just like pulls me over, and he was a GA at the time. We had actually played 2 years together. And so he comes up to me, he just grabs me by the helmet, and he just plants a massive kiss right on the logo of my helmet. And I think like I hit a nuke that at bat, like that very same at bat. And I look back towards the dugout, I point to him, he's going nuts, he's going crazy. And from that point on, for the rest of the season, he would do that before every single at bat. And I ended up having, obviously didn't get a hit like every single time, but still was able to go out and just like ball kind of looked like a beach ball from that point, and was able to just go out and enjoy it. And it was just kind of like a lighthearted thing to do to really just kind of ease the tension before an at bat. And I think that more guys need that, because they take it a little bit too serious, and they do get super overly analytical in a sport to where it's not as reactive. And so I think that if you can, create those pattern breaks that make it more of a reactive thing, you can allow for the subconscious to take over the conscious, which I think is a big issue for a lot of guys.
That's awesome. Part of me wants to almost get over technical and be like, okay, the biopsychosocial, that's
right.
But it's just, putting you at ease. I remember when I was in college track, our head coach was a very analytical person. Like, he was the mastermind behind the workouts and a lot of really good physical education inspired workouts that were really helpful. But the assistant coach was very like, kind of like that guy who gave you a kiss on the forehead. Like, he would give us like kind of like a half noogie. Like, and I don't know, it was just this way of physically connecting that puts you at ease, that, I don't know, you just didn't feel like you could go out and have fun doing, like, you were going to have fun doing what you were doing. Mm-hmm. And I think there's so much power to that. And I find too, that mind is the trigger that a lot of things happen. And that's why I really like that be sexy analogy. And I love that you put the individualized piece behind it, because it does mean something different for everybody. But so much of performance, before we even get into the subtle biomechanics, it just starts with body language. Even watching how someone walks around. Like, if I'm watching a track practice, how does someone walk around between sprints? Like, after they finish their one sprint, they walk to the next one. How do they carry themselves? Do they still have a little bit of side-to-side swagger to them? Do they kind of look uptight, or they feel like fearful or nervous? And it's something that, like Simon Cape on neurolinguistic programming and a lot of that mind-body stuff he talked about. Like, if you are playing tennis, like back to the tennis example, he talked about a coach who told a player who was, I think, struggling with nervousness, hey, who's your favorite player? Nadal. Okay, go be Nadal. Like, imagine what he's doing. And I don't think it's not the only thing that you need to do, but it's one of the first, I think, things that actually starts before a lot of other things is just, how do you carry yourself? What's the energy by which you carry yourself into this practice, whatever it is? It's whether it's the weight room or specific skill or more, speed and power output type things. And that's why I think that was something you said that I think not just baseball, I think a lot of activities can really benefit from that overall mentality.
Yeah. Nadal, as far as an example for like uniqueness, I think is great, because I saw a clip of him the other day at Roland Garros. And it was one of his last major victories of him in the tunnel. And with tennis, like, the two opponents kind of walk out, one before the other, lower seed before the higher seed, generally. And his opponent is like standing there super nervous because he's about to play Nadal, obviously. Mm-hmm. And he's on his home court, and where he's had the most success. And he's like, how much time do we have? Like, what's the count? Like, where are we, And Nadal comes storming out He's got his full Nike sweatsuit on, and he just grabs his racket out of its bag and just starts like basically shadow boxing, and he's like running up and down the tunnel, and he's like, he's going through like his backhand, his forehand, just doing like a bunch of jumps and a bunch of sprints and stuff. And the other guy is just like stunned. He's like, should I be doing that? Like, should I be moving like that? Should I be like, and I think he got beaten straight sets. With pitching, you're going to have guys that want to do like dry mechanics work, like the Kershaw kind of visualizations. And then you're going to have the Scherzer types that are a little bit more angry, a little bit more like caged animal types, to where then you're also going to have the Jock Peterson types, who's a hitter. It's not in the pitching sense, but like he's walking around barefoot, or Tristan Casas, who's like walking around barefoot doing yoga shirtless in the outfield before the games. And so, different things are going to work for different people. And some people are going to be more cerebral than others. But what it really comes down to, I think, is just being able to find like what's going to put you. And my college coach, to his credit, talked a ton about like conscious versus subconscious mindsets and states, and how it's like, when you're doing some form of deliberate practice and you're trying to work on a skill, you probably want to be a lot more conscious. And then when you get into the actual performance side, that's where you want to be completely subconscious and allow for all the work that you've put in to really just showcase itself, and you can bear the fruits of your labor that you've put in on the front end. And I've always kept that in the mind's eye, to where it's just like, tell yourself a joke, laugh, enjoy the competition, but then like when it's time to work, that's where you need to be super deliberate and focused and analytical behind what you're doing.
Yeah. That's its own area, I think, of study that's also so important, that's universal. And it makes me think back to the default mode. It's that can be more active when we're, in very training situations. Like but as the closer we get to competition, we have to learn to shut that thing down. And so it's like it's almost like a dial. Like, how much do you want this on right now? And within that as well, to my understanding, within that network, there's also the capacity to visualize or to tell yourself to be a thing. Like, that's where that comes from as well. So if I want to, hey, I'm going to do this visualization before I pitch or sprint, or I'm going to act like this person, there is some of that, self-direction, but you don't want to do that in the middle of you shouldn't need to do that. If I'm in the middle of the basketball game, I shouldn't need to be sitting there like, oh yeah, I'm going to visualize. I mean, again, maybe you need to, but like the ultimate, I highly doubt like Michael Jordan, maybe trash talking was his innate way of doing that. Or maybe that was their innate way of just getting into that pure spirit of that competitive nature and what they did. And I just love that stuff. And I think I do, because I struggled with that so heavily. I was always so just disappointed, I think, in what I felt I could have achieved. And everyone's like, oh yeah, I could have been a better sport athlete. The coach didn't like me. My coach always said, he's like, there's the Joel who's good, and then there's the overthinking Joel that shows up. And I always knew it, and it just drove me nuts. And so, to think about those individual things that help you bring out the best in both skill and, I think for any speed and power outputs, I think they're also highly, readily applicable.
The text that I shill on a lot of people, if not everyone that I talk to when we dive into this type of topic, and this is from Ron Sayers, the associate head coach at Salisbury, Dr. Ron Sayers, apologize, Coach Sayers, but How Champions Think by Dr. Bob Rotella, sports psychologist, has worked with Tiger, has worked with LeBron as well, but talked in his book about visualization tactics, and one of them being like making a highlight reel for a struggling athlete or just an athlete that wants to play better, and having them watch it before competition. So instead of that like visualization piece to where they have to do the mental gymnastics of being like, oh, am I going to take the shot this way, or is the puck going to break this way or that way, or is the pitch going to move this way or that way? They have the visual proof that they've done exactly what they're going to want to do in competition, because it's right in front of them. And he would have them pair like their favorite music behind it and edit the clips and make it super TikTok-y, I'm sure, however, the complexity of the edits would work back when he was actually doing this. But it would give them that subtle boost of confidence. And so I've used that with specific athletes that I've worked with before, like live batting practice sessions or like rehab guys. Big piece of rehab, in my opinion, is just like being able to get back to that state of like elite performance, not having to think about the injury. Obviously, I'm sure you've talked to people about that as well, but actually seeing yourself do the thing, in more of like a out of body way, whether it's just through like the visual, it is a lot more powerful than just like sitting there and chanting chakras and saying like, I'm the best and I'm the greatest. And like, no, you actually have done it before. Like, we have the proof.
Yeah. I agree. I like, Julian Pineau said something to the tune of, you can't namaste the bear away. Like, you can't sit there and self-talk.
I love that.
Sitting there visualizing, you have to do something that's like an actual moving identity. Like that track, that visualization track reminds me in the track and speed world, Chris Corfist, I think it was the last time he was on the podcast, said that there was like an audiovisual kid on the team, or I don't know if he was a manager, or he just loved putting videos together. So he made each athlete like their highlight reel, essentially. And I was just thinking, how powerful. And it takes me back to thinking about when I was in track, so 2002 to 2005, like, it was not like smartphone era. I mean, if you wanted to get video, it was the camcorder, VHS, and I didn't start getting videos really that I was watching of my jumping until maybe 2005. But I remember the first videos I was really watching was when I was finally jumping like 6 feet 10 or getting up to 7 feet, and it was almost like I was watching someone else. I was like, I can't believe for me, I mean, there's guys who jump a lot higher than that, but for me, it was like very empowering to see that. I was like, oh, I guess I can do this. And so I just remember what I felt the first time I saw those things. And yeah, that was a question that I was going to ask you as well. And you addressed it already there, but your take on the balance of like self-talk versus those other levels. Would you put it as almost like a pyramid, or like, you can self-talk and that's great, but it has to eventually go up into something that's maybe more comprehensive? Like, it has to go up into the visual you have of yourself? Or how would you place that if you had to lay out self-talk versus other methods in the structure of things?
That bear analogy is great. I think that when it does come to that, the deliberate practice has to kind of come first, and you have to like put the time in. Like, you have to put the actual hours behind the practice. And then the biggest thing with like confidence and just like being able to gain confidence, I think, is just skill acquisition, but then also the demonstrated performance behind it. And so like, if you haven't put in the hours and then also shown that you can actually do the skill in an environment that's going to be required for you to do the skill, then you haven't really earned the right to do that visualization. Like, you haven't really earned. And frankly, we wouldn't even, if we were to put together one of these videos that we're talking about, right? Like, you wouldn't have any of the proof. You wouldn't have any of the data, And so that's a good indicator that you probably need to put in more of that deliberate practice on the front end, and identify some of the opportunity areas that might be preventing you from doing that. And then having some specific direction as far as like where you can allocate most of your training volume and where you can allocate most of your hours, or training economy, whatever you want to really call it. But I do think that sometimes especially with guys that are like elite and have performed at an elite level in the past, there's a lot more tools that you can have in the toolbox versus the guy that they might not want to hear it, but it's just like, man, you got to put in the hours, because some guys are going to be more quick, dopaminergically motivated to where they're just like, I want the thing now. Like, I want to be at this level now. But they look at the massive pile of work behind them and they're just like, I don't know if I can do that. But then it's like, well, that's kind of what's required. Like, you kind of have to do that in order to get there. And they might not want to hear that, but I think that part of being a good coach is also being truthful with guys and being transparent.
Yeah.
Big part of it, And so it's about telling guys what they need to hear, not what they want to hear necessarily. And that's not something that you can like force them into. They kind of have to force themselves into it. But that's kind of my take on it. It might be like a tough love approach or a brute force approach. And it's counterintuitive to my kind of entire approach to training as well, because the text that I give to everybody is from a sports psychologist. So that's where I think like the mirroring between those two sides really comes in. But I think Dr. Rotella does a great job talking about how to get into those states through deliberate practice. It's not like the two are exclusive to one another. It's like you can get into those states and you can have that sort of like mindset shift and the positivity and the self-talk and all the benefits that come along with those. But you have to earn those through the deliberate practice first. And so it's the two things together. It's not like one's exclusive from the other.
It makes me think about what can be drawn out from putting the time in the sense of an identity. Like you put the time in, you spent this time, so show that you're the person who put that time in. And it makes me think about, and not to say that I think that there's people who critique the 10,000 hour rule, because if your 10,000 hours is just kind of ho-hum, there's not like that real flow state and problem solving and win the workout or the training session based challenge, it can be a very different experience. I was thinking about, it might have been a documentary or just something I was watching on Karsten Warholm, who's a 400 hurdler for Norway, world record holder. His ability to maintain speed, endurance, and rhythm is absolutely insane. And the coaching system there and the volume reminds me a little bit of what I heard about the Bulgarian weightlifting ABCA of the Butcher, where they train hours and hours and hours every day. And part of what was said, I think, on the documentary is because he trains so much, he feels that he is, it's like the training, it isn't necessarily, I mean, what's the extra 2 hours going to give you, honestly, if you already trained 6 hours? Like, I don't know, probably in my
negligible,
negligible, but it makes you believe that you are going to be the guy because you can handle that. And I think that's a tricky area, because I think there's a lot of people you give that volume of training to and they're going to blow up. I know a lot of people have blown up on that system, and there's only a few champions that come out of it. But if you can tolerate it, then you could be the dude. I'm sure there's probably, there's probably a lot of genetic factors. I'm not advocating for training that many hours a day, but it's, I think for those people, and if you can get that mindset off of it, I think there's a lot of things that connect in that equation to make it work. And so, whatever the connection is between, put in the time to be the guy and then make that part of the identity. It definitely works with an embodied perspective more than just, hey, just say you are, even though you haven't done it.
Yeah, and I think the common like human reaction is when things aren't going the way that you want, like doing more. Mm-hmm. I get this reaction from athletes a lot. It's like, I got a text from a young athlete yesterday. He's like, hey, I have an outing tomorrow. Is there anything I can do to prepare? And I'm like, sure. Yeah, you can get a great night's sleep, get a good dinner in, like go to bed early, wake up early, get the body moving, get blood flow. But he's looking for drills. He's looking for stretches. Right. He's looking for, an extra lift. It's like, I'm sure that we've all went through that period as like a teen or an adolescent, whatever, to where like, we do 100 push-ups and then like we think that the next day it's going to help us hit the ball farther, or we do an extra set of squats or whatever, we think we're going to run faster the very next day, and that's where then you learn about the SAID principle and the adaptation cycle and all those types of things. But yeah, so they're always looking for more, and like that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I do think that it takes away some of the actual direction behind the training. And as it relates to throwers, especially like guys that want to make 100 throws a day and then like something doesn't feel right, so they make another 50 and then they make another 75 doing this variation, and then like that's where you get the localized stress in the elbow, that's where you get the injuries, that's where you get the pitch counts, all these things that are leading into like the TJ crisis, if you want to call it that. I don't even know if that's really the term that people are using, but like got a lot of arm injuries and a lot of drills being thrown at guys, a lot of different tools, a lot of different weighted balls, a lot of different pseudo throwing mechanisms that lead into like oblique strains or lower body injuries, lumbar fractures, just like all the other things that come with like rotational actions. And so, yeah, I think that it's really hard for guys to conceptualize that like, hey, if you just focus like on these 30 reps or these 50 reps, it's going to provide you 10x the benefit of gassing yourself over the next 150 reps. But it's not the again, the sexy, like, sweat pouring down your forehead, like physically gassed, out of breath, like tasting pennies on your tongue type of like work that's been glorified. It's like, no, like 4-hour work week, like
Yeah, yeah.
be deliberate about what you're doing, and then you can actually reap the benefits of it. And then maybe you can do something else that's going to provide you the dopaminergic sort of like cortisol raising, come down, parasympathetic decompression that you're looking for as far as like a physical stimulus. I just threw a lot of big words out there, but that's just kind of like how my brain's working as I deal with more of these guys. So
Yeah, that's what I love. That Tony Holler's essentialism, and I know there's probably a lot of people who don't agree with the feed the cats mentality and this and that, and there's a lot of ways to look at things. But I think that something that I really appreciate from Tony is that essentialism and like doing more. Well, what are you going to get out of that? I think, and I like thinking of you don't know sometimes until you do less. And then like if I was going to do like you mentioned like 50 pitches, or if I was going to do a tempo sprint workout, it's my low day, and I'm going to do some 200s. That essentialist mindset almost of, all right, it's your low day, so you don't want to run too fast in these. How are you going to get the most out of these 4 or 5 200s? And I would think, okay, well, if I only get 5, I want to hit the time as effortlessly as possible. Like everyone is just, how effortless can I do this? Can I be more relaxed on the next one? Can I be more precise on hitting the exact time? There's something that's more yin in the system on that day that makes each rep better versus, well, I'll just do more to be better. I'll just do 10 or 12 or whatever. And I remember when I was coaching my first full-time track coaching job, I was also in charge of coaching the quarter milers, the 400-meter athletes. And I ran some 4x4s in high school. I didn't train for it. I was not. And honestly, doing typical 400 workouts with a lot of lactate, my body didn't do that well with. That was more plodding. And I remember one of the other coaches I was asking about, we had some indoor meets and the guys were struggling finishing the races, and we didn't have an indoor track either. So there was just like, there was a lot of things that, a lot of it was racing yourself into shape or trying to find ways to run outside if you didn't have the indoor track. But I remember one coach was like, well, he's like, what are your tempo workouts like? I was like, well, we run 8 or 9 200s. He's like, well, you could run 12. And it's like, okay, like, yeah,
Sure,
I
it
mean,
could, yeah.
you could, but I mean, I think, and maybe that would move the needle a little bit, but not nearly as much as the more specific pieces. And it's just the totality of doing the most essential work incredibly well and having that piece of it, and then the other stuff. But yeah, that's right. I really like that, that essentialism. Or if I'm high jumping and I only get 6 jumps today, how will I approach each of those jumps? And that teaches you something that you will never get if it's just only volume, volume, volume. And that's why I would be interested to sit in like, one of Karsten Warholm's training sessions. I just would be interested in observing these athletes who do thrive on that much, and what drives their engine. How is their emotional system going with that versus they probably like it. They probably love it, honestly.
Yeah.
Versus a lot of people didn't love it. And then therefore, yeah, we just get crushed. So yeah, it's interesting to think about.
Effort feels good, like effort does feel good for most people. And I think that like there are going to be the days where you show up to the gym, the track, the field, whatever, and you just feel like garbage. But then you get moving and you're like, I want to do more now. It's a feedback loop. But what I tell guys is just like, when you cook a piece of chicken, if it's underdone, you put it back in the oven. But like, if you overdo that piece of chicken, you're going to know right away. And you're going to be like, this is no good to eat anymore, And so it's like, to simplify training volume and recovery in the same way, it's just like, I would start with less because you can always add more. Not saying that means like, man, I feel really good after 50 pitches. I'm going to throw another 50, It's like, okay, like you've got an extra 3 days to recover on the back end, or, we don't have games this weekend, or you don't have games this weekend. You're late into an on-ramp period, so you have some volume that you can play with. Like, yeah, we can work on a secondary pitch, or we can make an additional 10 throws using this specific variation at 80%. That's working on a, specific mechanical change or a deliberate change we're making to your arsenal. That's fine. It's where, and you can relate it to diet, you can relate it to, leisure, whatever you want to. It's like, yeah, if you want to eat a couple cookies after dinner, you're probably going to be okay. It's where you eat the entire box that you fall into trouble, you know?
Yeah. Jack, I wanted to get this question. It's a little bit more of a training question in the sense that I mean, it's all training. I shouldn't say it like physical exercises is what I mean. I think it's so all related though. And you mentioned barefoot, and I've heard you or seen you talk a little bit about throwing and pitching barefoot, and then the impacts or the changes that can make versus throwing in shoes. So I'm curious about your approach to barefoot athletics and in the scope of pitching.
I think that there is kind of like an overemphasis with younger guys or more inexperienced guys on the lower half. They hear the term hip shoulder separation, or they hear like hip rotation or hip drive or lower half drive or lower half stability. And they think like, okay, I have to push harder, or I have to rotate my hips better, or I have to create a cleaner block on the front side. But then I show guys examples of like upper 90s throwers throwing like upper 80s or low 90s, even in some scenarios, like from their knees, basically where like the lower half's not involved. And I just tell them like the upper half throws the ball, like your arm does throw the ball. There are going to be specific things that you can do with the more proximal structures of the body to influence that. But at the end of the day, it's just like you're creating a loop of energy working from the ground, from like a stability point on the ground, all the way up through the pelvis, the trunk, eventually into the arm, the fingers, and then into the ball. And so when I have had some guys throw barefoot, it simplifies the lower half because it eliminates a lot of like the driving forces behind like trying to drive off the mound or basically defy gravity essentially, which is going to be like that fixed point that you're able to create rotation from. And they can create a more efficient upper half that's going to create the rotational structure just through the middle of the body. And I've used the analogy of like throwing a phone booth before, just to make it more of like a rotational action rather than like the overly linear component of getting on the slope and gravity kind of pulling you downwards as well, which I think is where guys kind of fall into traps as well. And so I think that to really distill it down to a base level without getting too complex behind it, it really just helps guys that have like an overextending lower half or too much emphasis on their lower half, just bring things back to being able to create that rotational structure through the middle and get back to the emphasis on like efficiency with the upper half, base with the lower half, and then making the throw.
Got it. Do you think that, I was thinking about how barefoot impacts just things like if you're just running, jumping, like playing soccer barefoot or whatever it is. Jumping is an interesting one barefoot because you can't get quite that horizontal driving force into the plant. You have to have a little more touch. Do you feel like with Devin Hayes, like he talks about coil and clear, like coil being that big windy rotational, like Aroldis Chapman, and clear is that over the top, more Justin Verlander. It would strike me that would a clear, more linear throw be something that's more related to a fast stop you get from shoes? And then if someone had been overcoached into be clear, like finish in the C and maybe they needed more coil, like would that be a way to kind of a constraint to kind of help them with that?
Yeah, for sure. And that's where you get into like javelin training versus like hitting training. Like hitters or guys that have like more of a hitting background are going to favor more of the counter rotation, myself being one of those. So I like was a turn and burn candidate. So I would like for my overspeed or my pull down variation would start away from the target and then turn, back foot plants, get rid of the ball as quickly as possible. Other guys that have more like that linear capacity or that like javelin clear-esque, they're going to favor more of like the straight run and guns to where they have more of the linear momentum. So it's the difference between like, are you going to be more biased towards the externally biased or retroverted like hip structure to where you might favor more of the linear capacity of the throw? Or are you going to be more of the coil mechanism to where you need to stay closed a little bit longer in order to create the gaps between like the lower half rotation and the upper half rotation? Justin Lazaro, who is the pitching coach at Cal State Bakersfield, he has a great presentation on YouTube if you can find it. Hopefully you can. You just type in his name, but it's about how lefties and righties differ biomechanically, just as far as like the structure of our bodies, the way our organs sit, and why like a lot of righties throw harder than lefties, and the training strategies that you could potentially use if you are a pitching coach behind both of those, and how a lot of these guys are biased. Like righties are going to favor more abduction for the arm behind the body. Lefties are going to favor more adduction as they kind of work across, and so they're going to favor more of like that linear capacity, whereas righties might favor more of the coil behind it as well. So you can get super nuanced with it, and there's smarter people that can dive into the biomechanics behind it, but hopefully that's more of like a simplification of the idea between those two.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I never really thought about that with lefties versus righties, because everybody's, your heart, PRI, your heart's more on your right, your liver is, and
exactly.
Your one lung is bigger than the other. And so, yeah, structurally it just makes sense, like rotating that way. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. I like that, hearing that too, because I think a lot of times we get very binary. Oh, Barefoot's the best for everything. And I feel like for an average athlete, a team sport athlete running around, I mean, I think it's good to do things both. Like if you take your shoes off, you have to have more touch. It's a little bit more touch with the ground, gentleness with the ground. And then you put the shoes on and you feel what the extra being able to push and really drive that extra friction you wouldn't get now gives you. And yeah, there's good things for both, but it's interesting to hear specifically what that gives you in pitching.
Yeah, and there's some guys that use the ground exceptionally well, and they ask like, so does that mean that I should like throw barefoot? And I'm like, no, not at all. And then there's some guys that have zero clue what they're doing with their lower half, and so like the proprioceptive capability of just having them take their shoes off and eliminate a lot of the things that like the stability with the ankle, the foot, that like an external piece like a shoe could give you, depending on what you're wearing, like that could be super beneficial for them. I don't like guys throwing in barefoot shoes. I have like an affiliate with a barefoot shoe company just because I like training in them. And I think that it's something that helps with, ankle stability, foot stability, just like the things that kind of work up the chain biomechanically with that, gait, all those good things that come along with those. But as far as it relates to like a skill-based action, you do want to have like cleats on your front leg. Rob Hill, who's with the Dodgers, like he was wearing two shoes back in the day to where it's like the lead foot's going to provide a bunch of stability. The rear foot's going to provide a lot more like malleability as far as being able to create eversion. So you can create energy loops working up as you create more of the linear action of the throw. So you can get super nuanced with it, and you can get super detailed with how you manipulate that in your training. But another Devin point here, because I know you've spoken to him before. Right. That's like level 6 stuff, so you can't skip steps there.
Yeah, 100%. I see high jumpers in the Olympics, like world class, sometimes with 2 different shoes on. And it's for that exact reason. They feel it. Like but that's a level 6 thing. Like I'm not going to, tell an 11-year-old who's just starting high jump, hey, let's optimize what this foot's doing and that foot's doing.
Gosh, yeah.
Yeah. Too optimal, too early type thing. We'll we got the pyramid. We'll get to it. Hopefully someday you can get to it. So
yeah.
Jack, awesome talking to you, man. Where can people learn more about you and what you're doing?
All socials is JohnB_SP. So JOHNB_SP. I'm on X. I'm on Instagram. I am on TikTok. And that's where I put out all my content that hopefully helps people. And I'm sure I'll have some things that I can expand upon from this conversation as well. And I do one-on-one coaching for pitchers, and I put out a lot of stuff relating to nutrition and diet and sleep and recovery, and some of the content centered around my dog as well, because I love the heck out of him, and some lifestyle stuff. And I try to keep things light and entertaining on the flip side of that. So if you feel so inclined, follow me and interact and try to get back to all the comments and messages and everything. But I'm just appreciative of you having me on. I've been a big fan of yours and the pod for a while. I've been listening and for years now, actually. And so this is kind of a cool little full circle moment for myself. And so I'm just very appreciative of you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Jack. It was great having you today.